Day 73 to 7:22 a.m. Moton Base, Mount Malabito, General Nakar, Quezon. Another day had passed, and another morning came. Everyone that had just arrived in this place was still adjusting to the environment. Nevertheless, they would prefer the current situation compared to their living conditions back in the settlements. Both Mark's group from Bay City and the members of the Salvador family could agree with such fact. There were a few animal attacks that happened last night. A wolf-like mutated dog and a wild monkey with spikes on its spine appeared on separate occasions. It seemed that the smell of blood from the previous battle still lingered around. Both animals were detected wandering around the place where the slaves previously stayed. Because of Mark, they managed to catch the wolf-like dog. As for the monkey, they had to kill it since it was a feral one. It was added to their food supply. Before Mark returned, everyone in the base would try to kill any form of danger that came close to the walls. It was because they had no way to tell whether these animals and insects were feral or not, aside from seeing some of them run away from the sight of humans. Most of the mutated animals and insects turned out to be carnivorous, and both humans and infected were included in their diet. Now, not only Mark but Annika was here. Everyone was looking forward to her taming more animals for the sake of the base. The girl even included the farm animals brought back yesterday to her list. That way, it would be easier to manage them. In fact, Annika already succeeded in taming one. The very first animal in the base. The female grebe that Mark caught after arriving in this mountain was already tamed by her. The grebe was already used to being around humans and knew that she was safer here than outside. Unfortunately, her eggs that Mark had returned did not hatch anymore, and she was rather lonely. Her existence, however, made the male grebe more comfortable after being caught. The two could be seen waddling around their co-op together like love birds. It would not take long before the base could add fresh eggs to their menu. Of course, it would still take more time before they could actually distribute it individually from time to time. They still needed to let the grebes procreate. Finally, as the tamer, Annika got the chance to name the two. The female was Maddie, and the male was Bailey. While Annika was busy with the animals, there were others on the fields to the north of the base. Using the water from the spring, they watered the plants that already sprouted from the ground. Some of the people designated to farming were busy creating new fields for the seeds of energy rice Mark got from Bay City. Rice needed more irrigation than other crops they had. Because of that, they decided to make the new fields south of the base closer to the river. While the adults worked, the children got to play before they attend their studies. It was mandatory since the adults did not want the knowledge of the children to regress because of the apocalypse. At least, they needed to learn about things they could apply to daily events. On the other hand, not only the people that newly arrived were adjusting. Even Laylaps and Fine were adjusting to the new environment they were in. Both of them were animals living in the city and was not used to the natural environment. Fortunately, the two did not seem to reject it, especially when Wargie, Nicole's pet, would go bother them from time to time. In fact, this fox-like wolf animal would try to disturb every animal it saw trying to play with them. It was good that the only ones it encountered were either the ones that were not interested in it or the ones tamed by Mark and Annika. If not, it could spell trouble for the mischievous young animal. Gerger, coffee? May spoke as he handed a cup of hot coffee to Mark. He gladly received the cup and sipped from it. Mark really needed some caffeine right now. There were a lot of things to improve in his home. Things like rooms for the little girls, another designated for his collection and consoles, and also the installation of the solar panels he brought back from Bay City. He also had other plans to do. He wanted to do a lot of things, including playing games. However, there was only one him. He could only do all these one at a time. Thus, he woke up early and started to work. After breakfast, he would also go and prepare for their departure. Mark was glad May was here to make coffee for him. He actually forgot to make one because he was too engrossed in digging a new room. Gerger, May spoke. Hallie. She's Hallie, right? The short woman with pink glasses. Yeah, that's right. Mark affirmed that she got Hallie's name right. Did she say something? Yes. Hallie said that someone called Miliel wanted to speak to you. Mark tilted his head. He could not remember anyone called Miliel in this base. He started to think that the person might be someone from the slaves or the tribe. Did she tell where? Mark asked. Hallie said that she's in that shed near the spring. Hearing that, Mark realized who Miliel was. He had not met her since they arrived. Since she wanted to speak, it seemed that she managed to open up to humans. Furthermore, she seemed to have learned the human language while he was not here. It was a good thing. As such, Mark decided to postpone his current work and visited Miliel. Hearing from Mark that Miliel was actually a real mermaid, May's interest was piqued. She wanted to stay behind and do her chores initially but decided to see the mermaid with Mark. The little girls were already awake and playing, so it was already fine to leave them with Odalina. ****** Mark and May entered the shed. The noise from the metal door made Miliel inside flinch and hide under the water in her pool. Seeing who went in, she was quite reluctant but still decided to show herself. She still remembered Mark. After all, it would be bad for her to forget the person who literally saved her. It was despite what his intentions were. Furthermore, Nicole, Hallie, Alana, Jolene, and Trisha did not treat her poorly. She knew that it was not an evil place. This made her think that the person who saved her was not a dangerous human, despite his appearance. From the girls that she met often, she slowly learned their language. There was still a lot to work on. In the least, she could understand the context and some common words. Aside from her savior, however, there was an unfamiliar woman. She could not help but look at her. Due to that, May and Miliel ended up staring at each other. May was fascinated by the appearance of this beautiful mermaid. Her blonde-colored hair adorned by colorful shells and stones and her golden goldfish-like tail perfectly complemented her appearance. As for Miliel, her thoughts were almost the same. Mermaids were born beautiful, and they knew that fact. In her kingdom, it was not wrong to say that she was the most beautiful. However, she did not expect that there would be a female human that could top her beauty. Ahem. Mark purposely coughed. He was there. Why was the two staring at each other? It was not like he wanted to be stared at. However, Mark had other things to do than watch the two stare at each other. Both May and Miliel looked down, ashamed of their manners. Can you understand me now? Mark crouched at the side of the pool and spoke. Still, he kept a distance as he did not want to frighten her now. To Mark's question, Miliel replied, yes, little. She spoke slowly. Even though she already knew how to, Miliel was still in the process of learning. She was thinking deeply about what words she needed to say before speaking it out. All right, I'll introduce us a bit. I'm Mark, this is May. What's your name? Mark introduced himself and May. Miliel, she replied. Hallie said that you wanted to speak to me. Mark spoke once more, which made the mermaid nod. She then reached for the centerpiece of her head ornament and took out a pretty, red-colored stone. It almost looked like a crystal if not for its pebble-like texture and teardrop shape. Slowly, she approached Mark and handed the stone to Mark. It seemed that she was now fine to approach humans. At least, for a few selected people. Mark carefully took the stone, and Miliel spoke. Thank you, saving me. She was a bit bashful. It was because, being a princess of the mermaids, she never tried telling others about how grateful she was. Her family and servants were the only exceptions. What is this? Mark could not help but ask. If it was just a regular stone or crystal, there was no need to question anything. He would just accept it. However, when he touched it, he could feel some energy from it. Key. Treasury. Our kingdom. This made Mark and May confused. Isn't this too precious for a thank you gift? Mark could not help but ask another question. In his view, this thing was really precious. Even though there was no guarantee that he would be able to go to their kingdom under the sea, it was still a precious thing. To Mark's question, Miliel looked down sadly. Don't need any more. Everyone. Dead. Kingdom. Destroyed. Cannot go home. Mermaid, like sirens, could charm people. At the same time, to the mermaids, this ability would reflect their current emotions. May now understood how Mark was feeling when he could detect the emotions of anyone. She could feel Millie's sadness as her own. Mark was the same, and as an empath, he could feel the sadness even stronger. If not for the fact that Mark was used to this feeling, and May barely felt emotions to other things besides Mark and her current family, the two would have shed tears already. As for the mermaid, even if she was sad, she did not shed any tears. She already accepted her and their kingdom's fate. She had grown stronger mentally compared to her pampered self back in her kingdom. The dangers and sorrow she felt made her grow stronger. Seeing Millie's sad face, Mark looked at May with an intention. May looked at him, who showed his hand glowing with faint white light, and nodded. Millie suddenly felt a hand patting her head. It felt good and comforting. She looked up and saw Mark patting her head. "You don't have to be sad anymore. Everyone here can be your new family." Millie nodded a bit. However, she was still reluctant to believe him fully. After all, they were humans while she was a mermaid. "All right, we need to go. We'll talk again some other time," Mark said as he decided to leave with May. Unexpectedly, May smiled at Millie and waved to her before going out of the shed. Millie watched the two go out with a bit of relief. Her heart was a bit lighter as she finally managed to thank the person that was the reason why she was still alive. About what Mark had said, she still needed to think about it. She swam to the part of her pool that had no roof. There, she could look at the sky while she reminisced about home. However, when she looked at the sky, her eyes widened. A swirl of gray clouds could be seen in the sky together with a familiar aura that suddenly surrounded her. Pearls fell and clattered onto the water as her tears flowed out. Asterisk asterisk. Gurgur, you're being sly. May could only complain at Mark. He was standing outside the shed with a crystal glowing in his hand. Mark had no time to ask Millie for personal information like her status in their kingdom. However, for her to have a key to their treasury, it was not hard to assume her status. He was right. As he activated the ability to call storms that could have belonged to the King of Mermaids, he felt an intense reaction from Millie. Well, it would still take time before she could open up to everyone in this base. They could only take it slowly. For now, they should prioritize things. That was why after breakfast, Mark left with the same team he had yesterday. They would go to the mansion to pick up the supplies and weapons left there. Possibly, get the Humvee too. Unexpectedly, someone had gone to the mansion first before they arrived. Day 73 to 10:32 a.m. Mansion, Padilla, San Jose, Antipolo, Rizal. 102 kilometers away from New Infanta settlement, this mansion could be found. It was a mansion previously owned by a business tycoon. That was what he was known outside. A kind, rich man who had several blooming business and several volunteer foundations. Not known to many, in the underworld of this country, the very same person was known as a smuggler. Drugs, weapons, and even people, he could get them in and out of the country without problems. He had a bunker under his mansion. This bunker served mainly as his storage for his wares. The items he smuggled from outside the country. Despite being a rich person, he was extremely fearful of suffering losses. That was why he made a tightly hidden bunker just for his underground business. However, the bunker did not only serve as secure storage for his wares. It also protected him, his family, and trusted people from dangers outside. Being wealthy on the surface and well-known in the underground market, various threats were aiming for his life. When the apocalypse happened, however, the man was on a business trip to meet a client in southern Luzon. Being caught in the middle of the apocalypse away from his trusted mansion, he perished along with his guards. As for his family and employees in the mansion, they all perished in a quite similar fashion. The only difference was his family and trusted employees were already dead. The wealthy man, however, was still roaming the infected streets as a mutated infected. There was no one else left in his mansion. His supplies and weapons were left in the bunker for the taking of anyone lucky to stumble upon it. In this case, it was Mark's group that was returning from Bay City Settlement several days ago. Since they did not have enough capacity to carry everything, they could only leave more than half of what they found inside the bunker. Because of that, however, it became a sight for the sore eyes of someone envious. Is this the place? A man with a solemn aura around him stepped out of his vehicle in front of the mansion. Just by the looks of his face, it was easy to tell that he was not a person to be trifled with. He asked that question as he glanced at the man still sitting inside the vehicle. That is right, sir. This is the place. The man inside the vehicle nodded respectfully. Hearing that, the solemn-looking man signaled towards the other vehicles in their group, making everyone not designated to drive go out. The man with the solemn aura was known by the alias Combustion, the leader of the survivor group called Hell Bombers. It was a group that was known for their delinquent members. They belonged to the survivor groups based in New Infanta Settlement. While they did follow the rules and regulations of the settlement, it was different outside where the law was already non-existent. They were known for blackmailing and forcing people to hand over parts of their loot, calling it a protection fee. It was a group undesired by most people in the settlement. However, it was also risky to confront them. Among their 30 members, half were mutators, and the remaining ones were evolvers. Furthermore, it was known that 3 of their mutators, the leader and his 2 henchmen, were double-ability mutators. A mutator was already rare in a sense, not to mention one with 2 abilities, and for some reason, 3 of them gathered in this group of unlawful bandits. This time, they were here because of the tip their newest member gave. The man inside the vehicle that Combustion asked earlier. As he went out of the car to show everyone the way, his face was open for everyone to see. It was no other than Harold. Harold already left his group filled with useless baggage. He wanted to lead a group of strong individuals, similar to what he saw when they were being escorted to the settlement. Unfortunately, Prince was already as good as dead while Kate did not follow him. Still, no matter how frustrated he could be, he knew his limits. There was no way for him to convince anyone to join his group easily, and thus, he thought of a plan. He decided to join a group that even the military would have a hard time dealing with. He would climb the ranks, and even if he did not become the leader immediately, he would have enough authority over the group. He would make each member trust him as much as possible, and when the leader suddenly died, it would be easier for him to take over that position and eliminate opposition. For the first step, it was to sell the group some valuable information. After all, who would be able to resist a large amount of supply and weapons lying around for taking? Once they managed to retrieve those supplies and weapons, his value in the group would surely rise rapidly. Boss. The gates are locked by some kind of black metal, we can't break it. One of the men trying to open the gates called out to Combustion. The leader also checked. This was the first time he saw this kind of very strong metal. The lock that jammed the gates surely made it hard to open it without actually breaking the gates. Furthermore, he assumed that his ability would not be able to destroy this lock at all. Nevertheless, it also made him assured that something valuable could be found inside the mansion for it to be locked in such a manner. Clear the way. Combustion spoke, which made the others run away from the gates immediately. He then searched where the hinges of the gates were located. Pooey. Taking a step back, he spat on one of the hinges. Then, palm. A fist-sized explosion occurred once his saliva landed on the hinge. From the explosion, the hinge was damaged immediately. He then moved onto the next hinge and did the same. Combustion got his alias for a reason. His mutation made his saliva explode after it was exposed to some elements in the air and the surroundings. The most common catalyst that could make his saliva explode was metal. Furthermore, as the explosion caused by his saliva was more of temperature than impact-based one, it was very effective in melting metal in an instant. Because of this ability, that alias stuck onto him easily. Palm. 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 After several small explosions, bam. The whole gate fell down with a loud deafening sound. After the gate fell, the other members around immediately carried the gate out of the way. Then, their vehicles drove in without hesitation. Of course, they remained cautious with their surroundings. They had their weapons ready for any confrontations that could happen. On the way here, they had to fight some mutated animas, mutated insects, and stray infected. It was not that easy to reach this far from the settlement. Furthermore, they had to pass by several towns which hindered them further. They left the settlement way before sunset to reach this place and arrived just now. That was how far this place was and how time-consuming the journey they had. In their minds, Harold should better be telling the truth, or just their current fatigue was enough to make them beat him up senseless. Still, if they really managed to get something valuable, they would be grateful. Searching for things around the settlement was not that easy anymore. The longer time passed, the lesser things they could find and scavenge. Or else, even with their delinquent attitudes, they would not risk harassing other groups. Even though they were strong in their own evaluation, there were others that were the same. Blindly provoking others could lead to a lot of deaths. They did not want that. Once the strength of their group dwindled, a lot of people that they offended would come after them. The military was included. Harold, where is the entrance to the bunker that you were talking about? Combustion asked Harold, who stood beside him. I only saw 2 entrances, Harold replied. One is under the statue in the garden. Another is under the swimming pool behind the mansion. You guys heard him. Combustion shouted at his men. Go check the locations he mentioned. With that order, the men divided into 3 groups. One group went to the garden to look for a statue, while another group went to the back of the mansion to check the swimming pool. As for the third group, they stayed at the parking area ready to back up the 2 other groups if necessary. As Combustion and Harold waited at the parking lot, voices were heard from the leader's radio. Boss, we already found the statue. We are trying to remove it from its place. The first group seemed to have found the statue easily. After all, it was too conspicuous in this place. Then, the second group also contacted them soon after. Boss, we located the secret door at the bottom of the pool. The door is closed and we can't see any way in. What do you think? Combustion asked Harold for his opinion. Sir, Harold replied. I think it is better to enter through the door in the garden. From what I remember, the door at the bottom of the swimming pool should have a broken elevator inside the bunker. Maybe the way to open it is inside. All right, Combustion nodded. We're going to the garden. The leader then signaled half of the members around them to follow. While they were on the way, the first team contacted them through the radio once more. Boss, we managed to remove the statue. There really is a metal hatch underneath. We are trying to open it, but something like the metal that locked the gates are blocking the way. Wait for us. We area coming, Combustion replied. Yes, boss. Combustion and Harold arrived at the garden. The members of the first team still tried to break the strange metal. However, their metal saws were broken instead. As their boss arrived, the men trying to break the metal hatch retreated to make way. Combustion then analyzed the hatch, and as his men stated, a black metal lock prevented them from opening it. As such, the leader tried his way of opening it once more. Pui. Palm. He spat on the hatch and a small high-temperature explosion happened. After the explosion disappeared, they saw that the surface of the hatch was a bit damaged. It was surprising and they were amazed at how sturdy the hatch was. Nevertheless, as the damage was properly made, they knew that their leader only had to spit on the hatch several more times, and they would be able to open it. As such, Combustion repeated the process and slowly whittled the metal hatch open. Palm. Finally, the last hit needed to create an opening on the hatch was reached. As the remnants of the explosion disappeared, they saw that the hatch was almost opened. They only needed to remove some of the parts that held it in place. They immediately approached the hatch to try and open it. It was then when Harold felt odd. As a part of his ability, his sensitivity towards danger was heightened. He could detect vibrations in the surroundings with his skin. Right now, he could feel some vibrations coming from the other side of the hatch. It was odd because there should not be anyone right now inside the bunker as he estimated. He started to think that the explosion's combustion caused made some reactions in the air outside. It was possible since the bunker was an enclosed space. Then, he knew that he was mistaken as he felt the vibrations started to become more violent. By instinct, he took a few steps back before actually bolting off and take distance away from the hatch. The others saw him and felt odd. Combustion, on the other hand, saw Harold's expression and felt danger. He immediately used his second ability. He spat on his hands and clapped. Then, he spread both his hands in front of him. An explosion occurred in front. However, unlike earlier that it looked like a ball, the flames this time made a wall to protect him. After securing that the front was blocked, Combustion also retreated. The leader tried to warn his subordinates to run away, however, it was already late. Black smoke leaked out of the hole on the metal hatch. It immediately swallowed everyone in about 3 meters radius around the hatch. Painful screams ensued. Some of the men managed to run out of the area covered by the black smoke. However, they still fell down, suffering. Their bodies festered and rotted at an alarming rate. It was like watching the process of a dead body rotting in a fast-forwarded video. The only difference was that the rotting men were still alive. They kicked a fuss and screamed as rotting holes on their bodies appeared, eating them slowly. It did not take long, and those that managed to get out of the smoke died. Combustion turned towards Harold. His eyes filled with fury. What is the meaning of this? To that question, Harold could only swallow his saliva. After all, he had no idea at all. Day 72 to 10:39 a.m. Mansion, Padilla, San Jose, Antipolo, Rizal. Black smoke scattered around the hatch found under the statue in the garden. As the smoke spread, it was accompanied by the blood-curdling screams of the rotting victims. What was scarier than dying immediately or being tortured to death? Feeling a pain worse than being tortured and watching your body rotting slowly. A grotesque hole opened on your body, slowly eating everything as it dug into your flesh deeper. Witnessing your skin and flesh reduced to a putrid mush as it exposed your bones and organs. Seeing such a horrible thing happen to yourself until all signs of life escaped your body. That was one of the worst things that could happen to anyone. It was a severely nasty way to go. Especially when the last thing they would remember before dying was their rotting organs spilling on the ground. Those that were not in the radius affected by the black smoke felt their stomach churn at the sight of their dying comrades. At the same time, they felt relieved that they were not the ones in that condition. They immediately retreated further away, afraid that the black smoke would spread even more. Fortunately, the smoke did not scatter more than it initially had. Almost everyone sighed in relief. The camaraderie of this group was rather low for sure. It was because relief was evident on the faces of their members that survived, even though their dying comrades were still rotting in front of them. On the other hand, Combustion's temper had surely combusted. Harold was silent as he did not know what to say. Thus, Combustion approached Harold and grabbed the ladder on his neck. By appearance, Harold was older. He was a government worker in his late 30s. Combustion, on the other hand, was only in his early 30s. However, the younger one had a foreigner's blood on him. His stature was way bulkier and taller than the older one. Furthermore, Harold had a passive personality and a schemer, while Combustion was wilder and a straight-up gangster. These traits caused the scene that was happening to these two look natural. "Boss, you must calm down." A person approached to stop Combustion. It was the second in command in the group and their second dual ability mutator. He was called Excel. Of course, it was also an alias. A man in his late 20s who looked like a rational thinker. In fact, his looks matched his role in this group as the planner. His ability, like his alias portrayed, was super speed. The muscles and bones in his body mutated in a way that enabled him to move around with inhuman speed. In fact, Excel should be among the team that went to the swimming pool. When the screams were heard, however, he rushed towards this place and saw Combustion grabbing Harold's neck. Being the brain of the group, it was not hard for him to realize what happened after looking at the surroundings. "Why are you stopping me? I almost suffered like our men because of this bastard." That was right. The leader of the group, Combustion was not angry about his men dying grotesquely. He was furious because he almost suffered the same fate as those unlucky men. "Boss, look at him." Excel pointed at Harold. His face showed it all. He did not know and had no idea that this will happen. Tisk. Combustion looked at Harold's and saw the confusion in his face. The group leader could only click his tongue as he released him. They already lost several people. Despite what happened, they could not just kill Harold and reduce their numbers further. "What do you think this is?" Combustion turned to Excel and asked. "Surely, a trap. Probably, made using another mutator's ability." Excel replied. Harold already said that these supplies were found by another person. The leader of the group that brought them to the settlement. It was likely to be left by them. Excel replied with sound reasoning. He was totally on point with his deduction. "Do you remember anything?" Excel then turned to Harold and asked. Harold, on the other hand, nodded. He remembered that Mark left this place last. Mark only caught up to the rest on the highway. Before Harold was able to reply, however, the radio Combustion and Excel had started to release sounds. "Boss, Excel, can you hear me?" It was the voice of the third in command in the group. He was called Hawk Owl. Like Combustion and Excel, his alias was given to him because of his ability. The ability to see far away like a hawk. Furthermore, it did not matter whether it was day or night, he would be able to see things within a very long distance. That was not all, however. Hawk Owl was also one of the 3 mutators with the ability to fly within Infanta settlement. It was because he could sprout a pair of wings on his back. Right now, Hawk Owl was not here with the rest but was left in the vicinity of the highway. Like always, he served as the main lookout for their group. This the method they always used to find other survivor groups and extort supplies from them. "What is it, Hawk?" Combustion threw a last furious glance at Harold before he spoke to the radio. "I found a large group of vehicles driving on the highway. They seem to be the same group that we saw arrive in the settlement the other day." Hearing that, both Combustion and Excel looked at Harold. They should be coming back for the supplies then. Combustion nodded. It meant that Harold did not lie to them, and there were really supplies hidden in this place. If that was the case, there was no way for them to let go of this. "What do you think we should do?" The leader turned to the brain of their group. "Actually, I rather not have conflicts with a group that had ties to the military," Excel replied. "But I think it is already late for us to retreat." Combustion could not help but nod. There was only one entrance to this area, and that was through the highway. To leave this place and escape without getting caught, they could only take the road going to the northwest of the mansion. However, that was also risking themselves. The reason they managed to reach this place was because of the same group that they wanted to escape cleaned the road already. Going further away was risky as it was likely to be an untouched land since the apocalypse ensued. "Boss, let's try to communicate and negotiate first. If not, we can only confront them. We should prepare an ambush as fast as possible." Excel formulated their plan to deal with the situation. They immediately called on everyone and prepared for the arrival of the other group. Asterisk. Riding inside the Exceed personnel carrier, Mark suddenly looked up. It was even though the only thing he could see was the roof of the vehicle. "Gerger, is something wrong?" May asked as she noticed that Mark detected something. "Someone is watching us. From the sky. Is it an animal or an insect?" Mark thought for a second and answered. "An animal with 2 legs, 2 arms, and looked like an evolved monkey." "Well, in a way, it's a pest. So, also an insect." "An enemy, isn't it?" May replied with understanding. Everyone else inside the vehicle, however, was all confused as to how May came to that conclusion. Unexpectedly, Mark nodded. It made everyone question their sanity because of these two. Right now, there was only Odalina, who drove the vehicle, Jaya, and Edsel inside with May and Mark. The others were left back at the base since there was no need for everyone to be here. They were just going to retrieve the supplies they left. On the other vehicles, there was Arvi and Jason that drove their armored carrier. The armored jeep was driven by Roland and Nikki. The Exceed Disintegrator Fortress was manned by Edward and Terence. Lastly, the last vehicle was driven by Monique's husband, Harvey. As for Chafflar and Giffer, Mark decided not to bring them. It was because while they could help carry the supplies, the presence of the two could deter any prey they could come across. Whether it be humans or animals, Mark would welcome anyone who wanted to be slaughtered. Fortunately, it seemed that there were some idiots, and more than that, there was someone with the ability to fly. If Mark was a bit crazier, he would have licked his lips already. However, that was out of the bounds of his personality. Arriving at the mansion, Mark told Jaya to order anyone to stop outside the gates and remain on standby. On the other hand, Mark stepped out of the vehicle. It was because he needed to face the idiots blocking the gates with their cars. 1, 2, 3. Mark muttered as he stepped forwards. 23, huh. 2 people stood in front of the gates. 7 people armed with guns were taking cover behind the vehicles that blocked the entrance. The rest were scattered around, hiding in the bushes, tall grass, and trees aside for one person. The last one stood behind the walls, hiding from sight and without any urge to fight. In a sense, Mark and his group were surrounded, as if it mattered, though. So, Harold brought you, people, here? That was Mark's first words, which not only made the enemies frozen but also shocked Harold that was hiding behind the wall. Regaining their composure, Combustion spoke. Are you the one that set traps to this place? What of it? Mark replied nonchalantly. Some of my men died because of that black smoke. You better compensate us for our loss. Hearing that, Mark looked at the tall, burly man standing at the center. That was rather cheeky for someone that tried to steal someone else's stuff. However, as if Mark would fell for that ruse. That speech Combustion said was only said to buy time. They did have the plan to talk it out first and say that their group accidentally stumbled upon in this place. Then, tell a bunch more lies and stuff. However, Mark mentioning Harold in his very first sentence ruined it all. Combustion only said those words to make Mark focus on him, while Excel made hand signals for their men to pass on to others. Since their plan to talk it out was gone into dust, they could only fight. Unexpectedly, Mark did not reply at all and just stared at Combustion like he was staring at an idiot. As a person with a bad temper, the leader of the enemies could not stand that stare. As such, he gave the signal to attack, and it was 2. PTUI. Combustion spat his saliva like a bullet towards Mark. Compared to what he used before, not only this saliva was clumped larger, it was more concentrated. Mark dodged the saliva, however, before it passed beside Mark. Boom! An explosion occurred engulfing the area within a 3-meter radius of where the saliva exploded. The high-temperature flames, enough to melt iron in seconds, engulfed everything including Mark. At the same time, the raiders hiding around the bushes, trees, and grass, sprung out of hiding. They all aimed to seize the vehicles of Mark's group. As they saw Mark engulfed in flames, Combustion, Excel, and even Harold thought that there was a chance to win. From the information they knew from Harold, Mark was the leader and the strongest one in this group. Yet, he was killed rather too easily. But then, Harold felt uneasy. He felt a threat that could easily threaten his life. It made him want to run away. As he trusted his senses, he really did try to sneak away. However, everything froze. No, they were not frozen. However, their bodies felt heavy that it seemed to be pushing them in place. Then, the flames from the explosion vanished. There, they saw the hazy visage of Mark, who was smiling sinisterly, unscathed. The most terrifying thing, however, was how his glowing red eyes seemed to pierce through their minds. Don't celebrate too early, Mark spoke. You might have caught me off guard, but that is not enough to hit me at all. Day 72 to 11:02 a.m. Mansion, Padilla, San Jose, Antipolo, Rizal. Heavy pressure enveloped the surroundings as Mark released the emotional energies he accumulated from his emphatic ability. It was a medium-scale, emotion induction, that targeted every single enemy in this area. Mark's eyes glowed bright red as he planted deep fear in everyone's subconscious. None were aware of it and did not feel the fear consciously. However, their bodies stopped moving as it recognized the intense feeling of fear inside the back of their minds. As a result, they felt heavy, and their legs were shaking. The enemies could barely move at all, and only those with enough mental fortitude would be able to negate this effect. Like 3 people among them. Rat-a-tat-tat. Gunshots echoed from above as Hawk Owl opened his wings and flew up. This birdman was the first to react to Mark surviving the explosion. Tang! 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 Some of the bullets hit the vehicles behind Mark, making everyone inside nervous. However, the deformed bullets fell to the ground after hitting the cars. Aside from a few scratches and barely noticeable dents, the cars were not damaged at all. All these vehicles had already been modified by Mark. Only high-caliber weapons could do some damage to these vehicles. M16 military-issued guns like Hawk Owl had, was useless. It was unless the bullets targeted the wheels. That, however, would not happen as Hawk Owl started shooting as he flew up. Nevertheless, Mark's hazy visage just blurred every time a bullet hit him. Each shot hit nothing but air in its path and flew towards the ground unhindered. Excel saw that the guns were not working. Supporting Hawk Owl's actions, Excel also started to move. His reaction was not as fast as the former. However, as a person with the highest intellect and mental capacity within their group, Mark's emotion induction had the least effect on him. As Hawk Owl continued to fire his assault rifle, Excel charged towards Mark at an unimaginable speed. It only took him a second, and he traversed the 7-meter distance between him and Mark. He even rushed behind Mark to attack from a blind spot. However, in another unexpected action, Excel did not use any weapon. Instead, he tried to grab Mark with bare hands. His hands, however, had been releasing a large number of sparks. It was obvious that he was releasing a rather deadly amount of electricity from his hands. Mark, on the other hand, squinted his eyes at the sudden movement by Excel. He could tell that the guy flying above was still affected by his mental attack as a lot of his gunshots missed him. This guy behind, however, was barely affected. Furthermore, this attack might be able to harm Mark. To dodge the explosion, Mark used miasma to block and absorb the heat hitting his body. Against the bullets, he partially used his shadow mist movement, causing his body to blur and phase through the space between the bullets. Electricity, on the other hand, was a different matter. Electricity was formless and could occupy space. He could enter his subspace, however, as electricity was not a physical matter but was a flow of electrons. He did not know whether he would be able to pass through the gaps of chaotic electrons without getting hit. As for absorbing the energy using miasma, it was already late. The enemy's movements were too fast. There was barely any time for him to react, not to mention releasing miasma. And thus, Mark made the easiest thing to deal with this guy. Excel proceeded and used his second ability. It was to conduct and release a high voltage of electricity from his body. This was also his deadliest move. None of those he used this ability to manage to live. However, he had the shock of his life. It was because of Mark directly catching Excel's hands covered in electricity with his own. Excel felt strange. Still, he already launched his attack and there was no option to retreat. Mark caught the 2 hands of the enemy. This caused a burning pain in his hands as the electricity started to burn his skin. His hands started to release smoke as the tissues in his hands' arms became numb and damaged. Seeing the effect of his attack, Excel raised the voltage further. This caused his arms to light up and emitted crackling sounds all over. Then, he was terrified. Excel saw Mark's face. He was smiling. Then, the visible damage from his arms and body started to heal at an inconceivable rate. Increasing the voltage further, Mark's body started to emit smoke. But then, the damage was soon repaired. It was until Mark's body did not seem to be affected by the electricity Excel released any longer. Feeling the threat in his life, Excel tried to retreat. However, like a clamp, Mark's hands locked his hands and did not let go. Seeing Excel's expression, Combustion and Hawk Own knew that he was in a predicament. Hawk Owl swooped down closer to Mark to ensure that he would not miss and shot more bullets. Combustion, who could still move, despite slowly, spat several times. He shot several nail-sized clumps of saliva towards Mark. To those attacks, Mark made a sinister move. He swept his right foot below and caused Excel to lose balance. At the latter's fall, Mark spun his body upside down and pushed his body towards the attacks of Combustion and Hawk Owl. Rat-a-tat-a-tat-a. G-A-H-H-H-H-H-H-H-H-H-H. Hawk Owl's bullets tore holes on Excel's body, making him scream in severe pain. Boom. Boom. The screams were replaced by small explosions engulfing Excel's body. Almost turned into a charred human, Excel's body fell on the ground, lifeless. His body was filled with holes of different sizes from the gunshots and explosions. His left leg and right arm plopped on the ground, detached after the explosions hit him, and melted his limbs. Seeing Excel's fate, their members wanted to scream, including Combustion and Hawk Owl. However, the pressure they were feeling prevented them from being able to speak. Excel was the most important member of their group. Without him and his planning skills, they would need more effort to do things they needed to. Fortunately for them, they did not have to think of those things anymore. None of them were leaving here, alive. Mark glanced at the sniper dome on his vehicle. May was there waiting for his command. He then moved his head as if pointing at the enemy above. Receiving the order, May aimed at the birdman above. Of course, Hawk Owl noticed the movements on the vehicle. With his superhuman eyesight, he clearly saw the muzzle of a sniper rifle turning to aim at him. Thus, he decided to flee. Excel was no more and the other members of their group could barely move at all. There was no use to staying. Everyone had no way of escaping aside from him. He could just start over after he escaped this place. He was able to fly fast with his wings similar to a hawk's. What he did not expect, however, was that even if his flying speed was as fast as Excel's speed, it was nothing to the eyes of May. Bang! Hawk Owl's eyes grew wide. There was no time for him to feel pain, however. He only felt an impact on his head before his vision turned dark. His lifeless body plopped violently on the ground like a rag doll. Seeing what happened to Excel and Hawk Owl, Combustion started to panic. Facing Mark, he spat saliva like a machine gun loaded with grenades. Towards those clumps of explosive saliva, Mark stretched his right hand forwards. He then started flicking his fingers. In every flick, a ball of black swirling miasma was shot. Each ball hit a clump of saliva. Thus, each hit caused the saliva to explode midair. Reacting to the sudden release of heat, the balls of miasma expanded and swallowed the explosion whole. The miasma ate the heat released by the explosion until both vanished. Combustion could only stare at the spectacle that happened before him. This time, he finally realized, because of Harold, they *CKED up big time. Well, we don't have much time to deal with you all one by one, so. Mark spoke. Let's just do this. Mark then raised his hand. It was a command towards Ignis as it flew out of its sheath behind Mark. Ignis could fly on its own. However, having a direct mental connection with Mark through the naming ritual, he was able to control its flight using his mind. All the enemies stared at the flying sword with both shock and fear. Then, they were overwhelmed by the aura of death looming over them. It was because Mark swiped his hand around making the flying sword behead them one by one in a single swing. As Combustion saw the sword flying towards him, he knew that he was going to die. At the last moment, the leader of the raiders turned towards Harold with absolute hate and fury. FCKU! Combustion screamed. As the sword was about to hit his neck, he made his last spit. It was towards Harold, who could only stare at the clump of saliva flying towards him in extreme horror. Harold tried to resist the pressure and even transformed as he finally used his mutator ability. Two large curved horns grew out of his temples as his body became bulkier. Thick brown hair covered his highly muscled body. He surely looked like a humanoid buffalo. With his sheer strength, he kicked the ground to dodge the clump of saliva. Despite the heavy pressure hindering him, he managed to move. It caused the saliva that was about to hit him fall to the grass where he stood before. Unfortunately, at that attack, Combustion used his greatest move. A concentrated explosion occurred engulfing a 7-meter radius from the center. Plop. Boom. At the same time that Combustion's head plopped to the ground. Harold's body was engulfed in the huge explosion. A shockwave of heat spread into the surroundings which made the closer flora to catch fire while the further ones immediately dried up. Mark also had to cover his face because of the heat from the shockwave. Although his body would regenerate to heal any damage, it was still painful to let his face get blanketed by scalding heat, especially to his eyes. Still, what worried Mark was that the corpses of the mutators to become charred corpses. If they were burned to the point of turning to ash, it would be a waste. Luckily, Harold hid further away from the others. That was why the explosion only caught Harold in it. When the explosion dissipated, what was left was an unrecognizable charred humanoid. From the smell, it was sure that the fur Harold grew contributed a lot to his death. Mark then used an empty crystal on the charred body. Fortunately, it still worked. Mark could not tell why as Harold's body was all charred. Thus, he smashed the corpse's head open. There, he saw that while he was charred to the bone, it seemed that the skull prevented the brain to be charred entirely. Still, Mark could not help but notice something. Compared to normal corpses of mutators and mutated infected that he took their abilities from, those that had damaged brains had a paler glowing orb inside the physical crystal. It seemed that the absorption of ability was incomplete or maybe degraded. If that was the case, he better try not damaging the brains of the mutators he would kill in the future. After killing every enemy, they proceeded into the mansion to retrieve everything they could carry. Even the working appliances inside the mansion and the solar panels installed on the roof were included. Since Mark was around, the traps he installed did not activate. Thus, there was no need to remove the traps he made using miasma, one by one. Everyone spent till late afternoon before being able to load everything into the vehicles. They also chose some vehicles from the group of raiders and towed the cars. This was a rather bountiful day. That night, after arriving back at the base, Mark and May went out riding on Chaflar. It could be called a date under the night sky. However, Mark had a place he wanted to go. He wanted to visit the place where the altar that sealed the deity of bloodshed was located. They went to retrieve several things. Now that everything they needed to do outside the base was done, they should focus on the things they needed to do inside. Especially, there were a few things Mark wanted to try. Day 73 to 8:15 a.m. Moden Base, Mount Malabito, General Nakar, Quezon. Another cold and fresh morning came. Everyone already accepted the change in their lifestyle since arriving at this place. Unlike how almost everyone here lived back in the past, before the apocalypse, it was rather dull. They did not have much to do but do the work they were designated to do regularly. Of course, they were not forced to work until they were tired or treated as lowly slaves. And they were glad about that. Especially those that experienced being slaves in Death Valley Settlement, they wished that they had stumbled into this place sooner. Yes, anyone could say that it was rather dull. Compared to living outside, however, this was heaven. The infected could barely reach these parts of the mountains. There were animals that should have been treated as a threat. However, the secure walls, traps, and the strength of the leading figures of the base turned these threats into a stable food source instead. Meats had already become a luxury to military settlements due to the scarcity of it, especially fresh meat and meat from mutated animals. There was no livestock to slaughter anymore since the apocalypse started. Because of that, the only meat food available could only be found in preserved canned goods. As for meat from mutated animals, it was a dangerous endeavor to gather. The word mutated stated it all. These were not the usual fauna Earth had before. Without proper planning, catching one for food could spell disaster. These animals had different features than before. Many of these characteristics were also deadly to their enemies and predators. Furthermore, not all these mutated animals were edible. Some of them had poison either in their blood or meat. In the base, however, it was very different. Everyone could eat meat on a daily basis. Furthermore, there was no fear of poison and such. Why? The existence of the blood children made a lot of things in this settlement different. While Ivy mutated in a way that its body contained poison, another blood child mutated oppositely. Apparently, a bad thing happened while Mark was gone and went to Bay City Settlement. During one of the days, Huey and the others were training their abilities. Nicole got attacked by a poisonous insect. She was stung by a fist-sized green-colored bee. Like ordinary bees, the bee died a few seconds after it pricked Nicole. Still, Nicole was poisoned. Bringing Nicole back to the base, she was already feverish. Her left arm that was stung already turned purplish. Without a doubt, it was a deadly poison. They were all in panic at that time because Mark was not around. That was when Ruby, the blood child closest to Nicole, did something they did not expect. With a tentacle, it pierced the area where Nicole was stung. Then, she started to suck the poison out of Nicole's system using her blood flow. Huey and everyone around saw how Ruby sucked out the poison. They could even observe a different colored liquid flowing through her body from the tentacle she used to pierce Nicole. Everyone knew that Mark would be angry if something happened to Ruby. However, they could only take this chance, and thus, none of them stopped it. Nicole's life was in danger, after all. When Ruby stopped and retracted her tentacle, healthy colored blood flowed out of Nicole's wound. There was still discoloration in Nicole's skin. Nevertheless, her complexion was better, and her breathing stabilized. One thing was odd, however. Ruby stopped moving. It looked the same as when they were in the sleep state. They all knew that it was not normal and decided to observe further. The next day, Nicole recovered. And so thus Ruby. However, Ruby had changed. Her reddish-black color now had been mixed with a purplish hue. She looked ominous. Still, that made Nicole's and Ruby's relationship even closer. Since that time, Ruby would take care of any suspicious animals they brought back from their hunt. If the poison was in the meat, Ruby would detect it, and it would be discarded. However, if the poison was within the blood, Ruby would happily absorb it. To say, the blood children were the very foundation of this base next to Mark. The walls and structures here were built solely with the metal they created. Because of Alaula, they even started installing light sources using the glowing blood metal she could produce. The production of see-through windows also started after Mark's return since Oracle was with him. Poisoned weapons, needles, and arrows were created by Ivy. Crimson, on the other hand, would do the surveillance while they were hunting. With his ability to turn into black smoke, he could go around the forest faster without being detected. He started this job after Mark returned. Because of the sudden influx of people, they needed more food for the base, after all. Lastly, and one of the most important ones, was Salacia. The blood child, named after a goddess of saltwater, helped a lot in the preservation of food. The blood metal was found out to have high concentrations of salt. With drying racks made from the blood metal she created, curing meat and fish caught in the river became faster and easier. From the newly created balcony on the face of the cliff, Mark turned into a house. He glanced unto what he had created. The base was just starting. Yet, he could say that it was already prosperous. The people living in his base had different aura compared to those living inside settlements. Even the new slaves that joined in did not have a hard time to find the security they needed. They had not fully recovered from malnutrition. However, the state of living in the base made them want to contribute. They desired to do what they could and be a part of this small community. This is a very different place compared to Bay City. May, who sat beside Mark, said. Back in Bay City, although the treatment they received was not bad at all, they barely had any time to properly rest. In the middle of the night, there were a lot of times that they needed to wake up and help to fight the infected attacking the settlement. Missions had to be done every now and then. And as one of the pillars in that settlement, the responsibility was rather heavy. Now, They did not have to experience such circumstances more than necessary. Yeah, very different. Mark could agree with that. Just the mood of the people could make the difference. Gerger, you should eat your breakfast first before it gets cold. May could not help but pout after hearing his reply. It was because he already went back to what he was doing without even touching the food May made for him. Okay. Sorry. Mark apologized and decided to eat first. While he ate, May looked at what he was working on. On the table, Mark made yesterday in this balcony, several pieces of paper with a lot of scribbles and sketches were placed. Without a doubt, he was working on a new weapon. Furthermore, on the sketch, it was a rather large one. Probably, something that could be mounted on the roof of a vehicle. She wanted to know what kind of weapon this was. However, the part was Mark could usually place the title on his sketches was still empty. Gerger, what kind of weapon is this? May could not help but ask as her curiosity piqued. Well, I don't know if it will really work. For now, it's some kind of psi railgun. Mark replied after swallowing a mouthful of fried meat. Hearing that reply, May was stumped. To think that Mark was currently designing a weapon that was still under testing of the military of other higher countries. Gerger, isn't this still in concept and theory of other countries? Well, I don't know if they really made a working one. But this one I am making is different. I'm using materials that don't exist on Earth before. Maybe it can work. May could not refute that. Many things were still in theory before because of the lack of things that could be used to make them. Now, however, many new things, like blood metal, started to exist. But Gerger, does it have to be this big? May asked. After all, it was really a big one if it could be mounted on a vehicle's roof. And to her question, Mark nodded. We need to prepare. If what I expected is true, gigantic mutants will appear in the future. I rather have something to use when that time came. That was something that May could not refute. The frog-headed infected and the stone-clad woman that they encountered before were good examples. Furthermore, there was also the wail she heard from Mark and Colleen. I just wish that nothing like that world destroyer will appear. Mark said with a sigh. He remembered the abomination he saw at Freed's memories. Gerger, what about the power source for that railgun? Well, at first, I only have one option. Now, there's two. Mark said as he called out two crystals and placed the two on the table. One was the lightning mental crystal. The other was the new, physical crystal he got yesterday. The only problem with these two was that the lightning mental crystal could only be activated by high. On the other hand, the physical crystal could only be used by someone that would consume it. He did not have any power source that could be used publicly. Master. While Mark and May were talking, Amihan flew up into the balcony from outside. After returning, she would usually fly around outside the base while enjoying nature at this time in the morning. For her to come this early, she surely needed something. You need something? Mark asked. Amihan flew down onto the table and sat down in front of Mark. Master, when do you plan to plant the spirit tree? Should it be planted already? Mark asked. In fact, he planned to plant it later after trying out a few things. However, it seemed that Amihan was quite eager to do so. It's not really urgent, Amihan said after thinking a bit. But it's better to plant it as soon as possible. You see, plants planted near a spirit tree grow faster and healthier. I'm having a hard time finding wild fruits. Ha. Mark sighed. I see. Mark stared at Amihan with a smirk. She might be hiding it, but she was a glutton. He clearly remembered how he met her when she stole a whole basket of wild berries from him. However, her suggestion was not bad at all. If a spirit tree could accelerate the growth of the crops they planted, it would be the best for the base. Should we plant it now? Mark asked, which made Amihan rather surprised. She then smiled and nodded fiercely. Yes, yes. Seeing her excited look, Mark and May could not help but smile. Amihan looked really adorable just now. As thus, Mark and May finished their breakfast and took the little girls out of the house. By the way, Mark suddenly spoke to Amihan, who sat on his shoulder. You have another agenda, right? Amihan froze and made a stifled laugh. I really can't hide anything to Master, can I? The little sylph sighed and finally said the main reason she was excited. Actually, Master, I just want to see the place where my parents were born. I might be a spirit as humans call me. However, I have never entered the spirit world. Not even once. I was born after my parents were outcasted by our race, here in the mortal world. Everything I know about their home place came from my parents. I just want to see their stories with my own eyes. Mark, May, and the little girls listened to Amihan's story. Every time she mentioned her parents, there was a fluctuation of sadness and anger inside her. She probably remembered how her parents perished because of an evil spirit. Since that was the real reason, Mark would not delay it further. He wanted to reward such a loyal person like Amihan. She might be mischievous and hard-headed, she never betrayed Mark's expectations. It was a good chance to reward this 100-years-old little girl. Day 73 to 9:22 a.m. Mountain Base, Mount Malabido, General Nakar, Quezon. Mark, together with May, Amihan, Iola, Abigail, and Miracle, walked out of the house. It was quite odd that Mark was carrying a huge sack on his arms, even though their plan was nothing else but to plant the spirit tree that Amihan anticipated so much. This spirit tree was a precious thing. There was no way that Mark had forgotten about it. It was just that there was no time to plant it these past days since they arrived. In fact, he already decided where he would plant this tree. That was their current destination, the wide vacant area at the center of the base. The one directly in front of the precipice Mark turned into his home. They only needed to walk about 15 meters or so. Still, along with that short distance, they came across many people in the base. Seeing the owner of the base and his family, they all greeted respectfully. Still, the people Mark passed by on the way could not help but stare for a bit. The reason being the sylph sitting on his shoulder. Unlike the others, Amihan and Ephelia were very elusive to the eyes of the people in the base. It was very unusual for them to see the two fascinating creatures. Ephelia might not be a real sylph. However, she felt too uncomfortable receiving such stares. That was why she was trying hard not to show herself to people. Amihan, on the other hand, while her fear of people was already lessened, it was already her nature to not show herself to humans as much as possible. The only times the two could be seen by people was when they were with Mark. This kept the interest of everyone in the base towards the two from subsiding. In fact, while living in this apocalyptic world now was dull compared to the past, everyone in this base had something to turn their attention to. It was the fact that this base had creatures that they never ever believed that could exist. Master. Mark. Two voices overlapped as they called for Mark. The two were no other than Alana and Jolene. Both looked sweaty, and their current appearance called the eyes of men around. It seemed that the two had just finished their morning training and was on the way back to clean up. Where are all of you going? Alana asked with interest. It was rare for Mark to suddenly go out with everyone. From what she knew of Mark, there should be something interesting going on. Like how he created things back before the apocalypse for her. I can't say anything much, really, Mark replied. You two are welcome to watch, though. We are just going by the central area of the base. Both Alana and Jolene looked at each other. It seemed that the interest towards Mark wanted to do weighted heavier than actually cleaning up their bodies. Thus, they really followed. Arriving at the vacant area, however, Mark and May were slightly surprised. Sitting at a wooden chair at the side of the central area. There was the seer of the tribe together with her grandchildren. From how they sat facing the center of the vacant space, it looked like they were waiting for something. Mark, you finally arrived. The elder smiled after seeing that Mark finally came to this place. There was no doubt. She was waiting for something. Mark did not have to say anything. Before any of them could ask, the elder explained herself. I dreamt that something will happen here today. I only know that it had something to do with you. I don't know what will happen. But, my dream told me that it is an important event that people don't really see. She was really a seer. After all, she was right. Something would happen that people would not usually see. Which person would have been able to watch a tree sacred to spirit races get planted anyway? Most of the population around the world did not even know the existence of it. Alright, there's really no issue watching. Mark replied with a nod. There was really no problem with it. After all, since he needed to release miasma during the planting of this tree, it would surely be noticed by everyone in the base. Yes, thank you. The elder smiled. Please, just don't mind us. As such, Mark made everyone wait at the side and stepped towards the center of the vacant area. Even Amihan retreated as it was only Mark who should be present during the planting. The area was designed by him to be shaped in a circle. At first, he would want to build something like a tower here. That was why it was shaped like this. Who would have thought that the tower he planned would be replaced by an unusual tree anyway? Still, it was not a bad thing. If what Amihan said before was true, the spirit tree would become several lines of defenses for the base. The only thing was that, like what happened in Mark's and Ignis' naming ritual, the kind of tree that would grow was rather hard to determine. What they knew was that the spirit tree would complement the kind of energy fed to it during its growth. That was why Mark decided about something. Mark tipped the sack in the center of the vacant area. The contents of the sack spilled out. This confused those that did not know what the contents of the sack were. After all they saw was dark brown colored dirt that was dumped out by Mark. This dirt, however, was not just normal dirt. It was actually the dirt gathered around a lesser spirit tree. It was one of the things Mark and May gathered last night. The soil around the lesser spirit tree beside the altar that sealed the deity of bloodshed for thousands of years. Furthermore, not only that it was a special kind of dirt, it had the residue of auras both the guardian and the false deity had. Pouring the unusual soil, Mark formed a shovel with his blood and dug the area he would plant on. He mixed both the normal soil and the unusual soil together. Then, he took out the seed and buried it into the mixed soil. After that, Mark unexpectedly conjured 5 mental crystals, and surrounded the place where he buried the seed with the crystals. According to Amihan, there was no fixed method to plant a spirit tree. Everything was up to the one planting it. Even the chant or the materials. This was what led Mark to do things like this. In Mark's theory, the soil soaked with the aura of strong beings would surely make the seed grow. Then, the crystals would ensure that something positive would be born of it. After all, whether it was the mental crystal or the physical crystal, both of these only brought out positive effects. Finally, the most important thing. It was to feed the seed enough energy to grow. And for the crazy Mark, he actually conjured the psychic mental crystals he had to contribute. The photokinesis mental crystal, the lightning mental crystal, and the stormcaller mental crystal. All 3 floated around Mark as he started to release all the different energies around inside his body. SHHOOOOMMMM. Miasma swirled around his body like a tornado. His right eye glowed red and his left eye shined purplish. He then extended his palms towards where he planted the seed. His right hand covered with wild milky light while his left hand was burning with bright orange flames. Then, the 3 mental crystal activated. Crackling sounds echoed as one turned into a ball of lightning. Another shined brightly like the sun. The last one was covered in a gray haze as it started to call the swirling clouds in the sky. The sudden influx of different energies was felt by everyone. Mutator or not, psychic or not, they all felt that something was happening. Annika, who was able to see the energies with her eyes, was alarmed by the event. Leaving her current duty to try taming the water bug, she ran towards the center of the base. Her brothers could not help but run after her after seeing strange behavior. On the other hand, a strange event happened that Edward, Annalyn, Colleen, and Terence witnessed. They could not help but run towards the center of the base. It was because Emmy, who should be just sitting on her chair blankly, suddenly ran away towards that direction. Then, another strange thing happened. All the blood children in the base suddenly left their current places and made their way to the very same place. This made Nicole and Hallie, who had Ruby and Merlot with them, run after the two. Even Layan experienced the same as Salacia suddenly ran away. Ignis, that was left inside the house, felt the same thing and could not help but fly out. Miliel inside her hut was rather scared and was hiding while rather confused as she felt the powers that belonged to her father. Not only the ones inside the base were affected. Even those outside were the same. Mutated birds could be seen flying away as if a natural disaster was to occur. Even the mutated animals and insects were the same. Furthermore, several individuals hidden in the mountains and forests could not help but notice the phenomenon. Outside the base, a man with white hair suddenly came out of a tree. What in the world is that guy doing now? Paphile could not help but mutter. The scale of what was happening right now was not something to be trifled. Although there seemed to be no ill intent on it, just the sheer amount of magical energy gathered right now was terrifying. While all of those things were happening, Mark was oblivious to it. The others did not know, however, he already lost control. Badump. Badump. This was not in his plan at all. Badump. Badump. The energies inside his body had actually gone rampant. Badump. Badump. There was that annoyingly loud heartbeat too. Mark was still conscious, however, everything was already out of his control. Even his body was not moving the way he wanted to. He could only stare in front of him. Then, he saw a swirl of energies being sucked down into the soil in front of him. Mark knew that the seed was surely absorbing the energy around it now. Rumble. Then, an earthquake occurred. It was not that strong, just enough to make everyone lose their balance for a bit. At the same time, the sky started to change in color. The gray clouds became frighteningly red, as if blood was about to rain instead of water. Then, like a beanstalk from a certain fairy tale, a plant sprouted out of the soil. It steadily grew at a fast rate that it was unbelievable. At the same time, Mark could feel that the energy inside his body was being sucked dry. Everyone in the base had already gathered at the central area of the base. Not only people, even Chaflar, Laylaps, and the other animals in the base were watching. Even Paphile managed to blend into the crowd and watch what was happening, up close. Some were scared, some were confused. Nevertheless, whatever emotion they felt, they still felt amazed as they saw a plant that had just sprouted from the ground growing into a tree. Then, everyone saw Mark fell onto one of his knees. He was obviously in extreme pain. That scared May. However, the swirling energy around Mark prevented anyone from approaching. But then, Mark's wings sprouted from his back. Strange, however, there was not just one pair, but two. Furthermore, both pairs that looked identical started to change. Red glowing veins appeared like a streak of lightning in a dark rainy sky. His hair grew long once more. At the same time, the markings in his body acted up too. Slowly, Mark stood up once more. He turned his head around looking at everyone. They were all shocked. Blood-red horns had already grown on his forehead and two pointed canine fangs could be seen protruding from his mouth. Finally, the earthquake stopped and the swirling energy vanished as the spirit tree took shape. An 8-meter tree that towered over the base with its blood-red leaves, and black-colored trunk and branches. Red glowing veins could be seen in each leaf that looked identical to Mark's wings. When Mark turned around, another strange thing happened. It started with the blood children. Then, Chaflar, Iola, Miracle, Emmy, and lastly, Alana. They all bowed down and kneeled on foot as they faced Mark. This made everyone even more confused. It was until they noticed a scary thing. The blood children were releasing a faint reddish glow on their bodies, even Miracle was included. On the other hand, Chaflar had its eyes glowing red, and its scales exuding a reddish light. For the Iola, Emmy, and Alana, however, everyone felt even more afraid. Their eyes were glowing red while the veins on their bodies became rather visible as their veins exuded the same glow as Mark's. Seeing this, Paphile had the greatest shock of his life. It was even a greater shock he received after hearing what happened to his wife. The signs he saw on Mark's and the bodies of the others. It was somewhat inconceivable. Under his breath, he could not help but mutter. The night-evered spirit tree. And the blood demon race that had gone extinct. They actually appeared once again. Still, when he said those words, he was not afraid. Instead, it was obvious that he was rather excited. Day 73 to 10:30 a.m. Mountain Base, Mount Malabido, General Nakar, Quezon. The tremendous event was witnessed by almost everyone, in and out of the base. Whether it be humans, animals, insects, infected, or non-mortal beings, they saw the blood-red color that covered the clouds and the sky in several-mile radii. It was even if they did not see the actual reason. With the blood-red sky could be seen miles away, many people were alarmed. The new survivors that now inhabited Barangay Daritan closed their doors tightly as they gazed at the strange sight. Even the new Infanta settlement was alarmed by the scene, and the military went in full alert. Civilians were told to retreat back to their dwellings and wait for further instructions. On the other hand, survivor groups known for their inhuman abilities were called for a possible disaster. It was especially since everyone here experienced the pitch-black storm that destroyed 3 settlements not long ago. Not only that, unknown to most people, other smaller survivor groups managed to survive hidden in many places. Even these poor people felt terrified because of the ominous appearance of the sky. Not to mention the earthquake that occurred. It was not too strong. However, the tremors were still felt by everyone within a great distance. As for the non-mortals, they were even more shocked. Being otherworldly entities themselves, they were sensitive to the immense influx of supernatural force that transpired below the blood sky. Of course, they felt threatened. Such amount of energy undoubtedly belonged to something nearing the level of a lower deity. They could only hope that it was not a malicious entity. Or else, they would be forced to flee. That powerful entity could become the new overlord of these mountains. Because of that, while some felt fear, some of these creatures started to consider paying their respects. This had been a rule to these races. If one could not defend themselves, they would either run away or submit. That way, they could ensure their lives. It was because, unlike the world of mortals, the world of the paranormal was more prone to deadly conflicts. Deadly enough that a single dispute might end up to the fall of a whole race. While everyone outside feared, the actual cause of the event was now at a stupor. As the supposed short session of planting the spirit tree had finished, the sky started to clear up back to its natural state. The violent surge of paranormal energies had finally calmed down and vanished. At the same time, Mark and those that knelt towards him finally snapped out of their trance. They were all confused as to what in the world happened. Especially Mark, who transformed into something he never had before. Feeling not used to the slight weight added to his forehead, he touched it only to get pricked by his sharply pointed horns. Each red blood horns were about 4 inches long with a bit of curve. Mark could not understand why this pair of horns suddenly grew. Inspecting his body, he felt his canine fangs and saw the new pair of wings that grew on his back. Furthermore, his hair grew once again. Now, it had a bitter red highlights mixed with the previous white ones. The most annoying part was that he had to cut this long hair for the 4th time already. Gerger, are you okay? May immediately came towards him with the 3 girls. Both Iola and Miracle seemed to be confused as to what had transpired earlier. But one thing they were sure, their bodies were far stronger than before. I'm fine. Mark replied and looked at Iola and Miracle. Are you two fine? Mark saw everything, even though he had no control over his body at that time. It would be lying if he said that he was not worried about Iola and Miracle. Papa, I'm fine, I think. Fine, I'm fine. Both Iola and Miracle replied respectively. As there the two really seemed fine, Mark sighed in relief. Mark looked around toward everyone that exhibited that strange behavior. Despite looking confused, they all seemed to be all right. That was a good thing. Still, Mark could feel a distinct aura from them that was not different from his. It was as if everyone was connected, though the connection was a bit weak and unnoticeable. Then, pang! Everyone received a great shock as they suddenly heard a loud sound amidst the confusion. When everyone turned where the sound came from, they saw Alana, who was still in a punching pose. It seemed that for some reason, she punched the metal wall of the structure near her. The most surprising thing, however, was that her fist actually sunk half an inch into the wall. It would not be this shocking if what she punched was a regular metal sheet. That black wall she had just hit was in no doubt made of blood metal. Alana might be an evolver. However, her ability was her enhanced stamina. There was no way for her to be able to do such a thing. Oops. Sorry. Everyone. Alana noticed the commotion she created. She could not help but apologize while scratching her head. Of course, it could not be hidden in her expression that she was absolutely confused about her current strength. In that commotion, Mark called Huey and Jolene to make everyone disperse. He decided to sort things first before telling the crowd what actually happened here. Of course, he decided to make those that were acting strange earlier to remain. And lastly, Paphile, just what are you doing here? Mark called out to someone that no one in the settlement knew of. In their search for the person, the owner of the base was calling for. They saw an unfamiliar person step out of the crowd. Everyone was surprised at the fact that someone handsome looking was here, and no one knew about him. Of course, Edsel somehow recognized that person. There was no doubt that he was the person that guided him to Pearl. This mysterious person actually appeared here. Edsel was confused. Furthermore, Mark seemed to know this person. You really surprise me. You know that, Paphile said as he approached Mark while panning his sight from Mark towards the spirit tree. Do you know anything about this? Mark asked with a frown. To that question, Paphile smiled. What I know might not be concrete information. I don't mind sharing if you want to know about it. Good. Come with us. Mark said. Unexpectedly, Paphile nodded without hesitation. It was even though he was now exposed to the humans around. This made Mark think that there might be more to it that Paphile wanted. Everyone dispersed from the plaza and returned to their work. Of course, there were a lot of questions in their minds. However, Mark's representatives in the base, Huey and Jolene, already told everyone Mark's plans. They could only wait. Only those who were affected by the sudden change in their behavior earlier followed Mark along with a few people. The only exceptions were Chaflar and most of the blood children, since they would not understand the conversation that would happen. As for the few people that followed, there was Edward, the tribe elder, and her grandchildren, Edsel and Pearl, lastly, those that were living in Mark's home. Edward was accompanying Emmy. She was being silent. However, it was obvious that she was not mentally ill anymore. Her blank eyes from before were now showing emotions. She was even walking ahead of Edward while pulling his hand. He was truly happy. However, this was not the right time to celebrate. As for the elder and her grandchildren, they were actually called out by Paphile. Because of that, Mark could not help but let them come along. Edsel and Pearl were following because Mark called the two. Since Paphile decided to show himself, there was a chance that he would finally tell his circumstances. Furthermore, Paphile actually did not refute Mark's actions. As for the others, there was Odalina and Spera, who were both living in Mark's house. The two served as the house's servants. Spera was diligently learning from Odalina. They were called to serve treats. After all, they had guests. Inside the main room, The very same room Mark used when he made Huey and the others turn into evolvers. Everyone gathered. They were all focused on Pafile. Well, except for Mark. Mark was able to retract his wings. Now, he was trying if he could retract his horns and fangs. There were some changes. However, it was rather hard to control. As for his hair, he had given up on it. As such, May volunteered to cut it later. This would be the second time that she would do it, and she was happy to be able to do something for Mark. On the table, Ephelia and Amihan sat. It was obvious that the two were also interested in what Pafile would say. Furthermore, the two could tell that Pafile was not human. Amihan was a sylph, after all. She could tell if the one in front of her was another spirit race or an elemental. On the other hand, Ephelia could tell because she was in the body of a sylph. Pafile also seemed interested in the two. However, it was not the time for that. So, can you tell us what you know already? Mark voiced out. All right, I will go straight to the point. Pafile nodded. Have any one of you ever heard of blood demons? Blood demon. Alana suddenly chimed in. Are they capable of? Mizuki. Stop. Mark immediately cut off Alana. That's obviously a different thing. That made Alana sit down silently. She just wanted to joke a bit. However, she was shot down brutally. Blood demons. That extinct race. Amihan was visibly shocked. She never saw one as the race had been extinct several hundred years already before she was born. Who would have known that they would be mentioned by Pafile? To her outburst, Pafile nodded in confirmation. Finally, he told the story. Blood demons, they were a very prominent race in the world of spirits several hundreds of years ago. They were known to exhibit abilities that were related to their blood. Furthermore, these abilities varied to a great degree. Their appearance was also not consistent. It was because, aside from pure blood demons, the blood demon race was actually composed of individuals coming from different races. The only thing consistent with every member of their race was that glowing veins would appear on their bodies every time they would use their abilities to the maximum. That was coupled with glowing red eyes. For pure blood demons, they were known to have veined wings and horns. The deepness of the color of the horns and the number of pairs of wings determined the purity of the individual. Contrary to being demons, however, they were one of those demon races that were not considered to be purely evil. Rather, their race could be said as one of the pillars maintaining the balance between the races of demons, evil spirits, elementals, spirits, and cryptids. The blood demons stood between the lines of good and evil in the spirit world. They were not biased towards any race and kept their neutrality. Of course, not many of the other races liked that fact, especially the other demon races. Most demon races had a hostile relationship to blood demons despite having a related race. At that point, the story was cut off by Mark's question. Did you say that blood demons are composed of individuals that came from different races? How is that possible? To that question, it was not Pafile who answered. It was actually Amihan. Master, I don't know if it was true. She spoke. My parents told me stories about blood demons before. They said that a pure-blooded blood demon can turn other races or creatures into blood demons using the essence of their blood. That made Mark freeze for a second. He then turned to Iola. He also remembered that the blood children and Shaflar also exhibited such behavior. He did not know about the blood children, as they were truly mysterious creatures. However, there was no doubt. Pafile already said that pure-blooded blood demons had horns and veined wings. He had both. There was no way for him to know how it happened. However, the evidence was here. He was a pure-blooded blood demon. Mark was the reason both Iola and Shaflar had that reaction. He turned the two into blood demons. Day 73 to 11:06 a.m. Cliff House, Mountain Base, Mount Malabito, General Nakar, Quezon. Seeing Mark thinking deeply, Pafile paused his story. It was not hard to guess what he was thinking. As for May and Odalina, there was no need to guess. They knew the real circumstances of Iola. Colleen and Alana, on the other hand, also saw how Mark tamed Shaflar. He made the lizard drink a drop of his blood in the process. Both Iola and Shaflar were among those that behaved strangely earlier. As for the others, they still had to wait for the possible clues about why they were the same. Then, a crucial question came into Mark's mind as he turned back to Paphile. If pure blood demons can turn other races into their kind, how did they get extinct? That was a good question that everyone here was interested to know the answer. However, before Paphile could even answer, Mark realized the answer. Seems like you realized it quickly. Paphile spoke, making the others look at Mark. It's because of those rules binding the race, isn't it? Mark said, in which Paphile nodded too. If a pure blood demon wanted to turn others into their kind, the other individual must agree first. If not, they can reject the blood, and its ability to turn them into a blood demon will be negated. It's a rule of their race that came from their very origin. This answer told everyone how such race had gone extinct. It was either the pure blood demons had gone extinct first, disabling their way to repopulate their numbers, or there was a lack of other individuals wanting to join their race. And now, there was the existence of a person named Mark. A being not bound to the rules of the world was actually a pure blood demon. Just with a drop of his blood alone, he could cause chaos to two different worlds. It is good that I don't have to explain it any further. Paphile nodded as he saw Mark's face, who surely realized his circumstances. How did the blood demons become extinct? Mark asked another question as he did not have time to dwell in his circumstances at this moment. To that question, both Paphile and Amihan shared in telling parts of the history unknown to mortals. Being said before, the blood demons kept the balance between the races in the world of spirits. However, that position always put the race in jeopardy when an enormous conflict between other races occurred. The story should start with the geography of the spiritual dimension. Unlike Earth, that was portrayed to be spherical or an oblate spheroid, the actual shape of the world of spirits was unconfirmed. It was even with the fact that the shape of its continents and countries were the perfect copy of Earth. In that dimension, a group of islands identical to the Philippines existed. A vast continent like Asia existed similarly. It was the same for other countries. The greatest difference, however, instead of broad seas, each country and continents were divided by deep chasms. These deep chasms made the seawater flow down immeasurable cliffs. That was why the seas around countries were not that wide, allowing very few races to live in. Under those chasms, the demon races lived. It was not wrong to say that it was an actual representation of hell in religious beliefs. The underworld. Because of the chasms, there were very few places that connected the underworld to the surface. The underworld and the surface were two different realms but following a single rule. Most demon races could only live in the dark depths of the underworld, while the vice versa applied to spirit races. When races with these restrictions wanted to go on the other's place, they needed to prepare a lot of things or they would end up weakening themselves. To a dimension prone to conflicts, being weakened in enemy territory would surely bring anyone to death. This reason made most races to live away from the places that connected the two realms. It was because, on those boundaries, both the spirit and demonic auras exist. However, there were a few exceptions. One of those exceptions was the blood demon race. Being a race that was composed of different races and having high adaptability to surroundings, they lived by the border of the surface and the underworld. That way, they also kept the balance between the two realms. Many races did not like the blood demons, and there were also races that were envious of them. Nevertheless, the blood demons were numerous in number that most races did not want to mess with them. It was until a disaster occurred. Aside from the spirit dimension, there were other two dimensions that existed. The inhabitants of those two dimensions were in constant war with each other. During one of their greatest wars, the archleaders of those dimensions opened doors to the spirit dimension. The inhabitants of the higher dimension appeared from the sky while the inhabitants of the lower dimension appeared under the chasms. Rallying the spirits and demons to their camps, the Great War occurred in the spirit dimension. It was all because of the rewards, power, and treasure the two camps promised to the races of the spirit dimension. That was the nightmare of blood demons. Being at the border of the surface and underworld, they have been sandwiched between the two opposing forces. Being a neutral race that did not want to take sides, both the camps of the outsiders deemed the blood demons unnecessary. In that war, many spirits and demons died. For the blood demon race that tried to stop it. The very last of them was killed in the process. There might be survivors of the race that had gone into hiding. However, none of them were found. After the war at that time, the spirit dimension was left devastated. As for the instigators, none was heard from them as they closed the doors to their own dimensions. It was already late when both the demon races and spirit races realized that they had been used. In the process, many races, like the blood demons, had gone extinct. Because of that, more conflicts had risen since then. As there was no one guarding the borders of the realms anymore, it was easier for both realms to cause trouble to each other. That was why some of the spirits that could not take the state of the spirit dimension fled to the mortal world instead. Hearing the story, everyone in the room was dismayed. Especially to Mark and those that showed the signs of being blood demons earlier. They felt a certain connection to the story that gave them more impact than normal. The blood demons were in no doubt victims. They were victims of the greed of other races. It was a rather pitiful end. Now, however, blood demons had somehow resurfaced. Still, they could not fathom the actual reason why and how they became blood demons. Finally, Alana could not handle it anymore. She asked a question. I have a question. According to what you said earlier, not only Mark, even me and some of the people here belong to blood demons. But, how did that happen? Paphile turned to Alana before turning to Mark, then to Edsel. He then spoke. I don't know if you will believe me. I'll tell you, however. Not all humans are purely human. That was a deep statement. However, no one could refute it at all. As the existence of spirits and demons were now revealed before them, they did not know what they should believe anymore. I don't know for sure. Paphile continued. There might be someone in your ancestry that was a blood demon, or also had the blood of a blood demon in them. It is really something that is hard to determine. But, facts speak for themselves. As humans always say, it was really a hard thing to determine. However, the reaction Mark and the others had earlier, it was hard to refute otherwise. Does the spirit tree had something to do with it? Mark voiced out, in which Paphile shook his head. The spirit tree might have helped trigger the blood of blood demons hidden in their veins. The Night-Evered tree, it is one of the requirements to awaken the dormant blood of the demon blood race. Then, Paphile looked at Mark with a serious expression. It is different to you, however. Spirit trees are born differently. What kind of tree it will end up differs depending on the individual planting it. For you to be able to plant a Night-Evered tree, it meant that one of your ancestors in the past is a pure blood demon. Blood from a pure blood demon can lay dormant but not acquired. Or else, that little girl there would already have the same pure blood as yours. Paphile looked at Iola. Mark was not able to refute that either. If the blood of a pure blood demon could be acquired, Iola should have grown horns and wings too. While Mark was thinking that, Paphile added something. There's something I am very confused about. This made everyone turn at Paphile only to see him staring at Mark. What are you talking about? Mark asked. You see, dormant blood, no matter what spirit or demon race it is, there are procedures to be followed to awaken it. Like these girls, they needed the presence of the Night-Evered tree to partially awaken the dormant blood of the blood demons inside them. The process was even more difficult for pure-blooded ones. At that point, everyone's gaze at Mark turned rather strange. Then, Paphile finally said his question. Just what did you do for you to fully awaken your dormant blood, to the point of being able to plant a spirit tree at the level of a king of a race? That question put Mark into a stupor. The answer to that question. He did. Not. No. Mark was just doing things randomly and did other things when the situation called for it. He had a few speculations. First, he absorbed an actual demon. Second, he absorbed a blood creature. Third, he mutated himself to have wings. Fourth, he absorbed energy from another demon. Fifth, because of the mutation he got after becoming a mutator. Sixth, because of the psi crystal. Seventh, it was a pure coincidence. Still, no matter how much he tried to speculate, there was no way for him to find the actual answer. There was only one thing that was sure. 8. It was because of mutagen. Everything of this started since mutagen arrived on Earth. Compared to the other reasons he thought of, it was the most likely thing that caused it. Furthermore, for some reason, mutagen would cause some blood-related family members to have close to identical abilities and mutations. Emika and Mikio was the best example of this. Even their father turned into a huge tree ant after turning into a mutated infected. What if mutagen was not just mutating people, but was actually capable of awakening the genes dormant within the person's body? That was the best theory Mark could come up with. As Mark could not answer, there was no need to push it further. Everyone understood that, even Mark confused about the things happening right now. All right, I give up. I can't think of any reason. Mark shrugged his shoulders. Anything else you two need to tell us about the blood demons? Mark asked Pafile and Amihan, which made the two turn at each other. Pafile then sighed. I don't have much to tell. I haven't lived that long. What I know also came from others. Me too. Amihan also answered. That made everyone rather unsatisfied. There was not enough information at all. Mark then asked about the night-evered spirit tree that Pafile spoke several times before. However, aside from its name, appearance, and the fact that only a pure blood demon could raise a tree like that, there was nothing else he knew. Most information about races was rather kept by themselves. It was because some of it could reveal the weakness of a race. With how the blood demons had gone extinct, they brought a lot of information about their race into their graves. The only thing that might tell them the things they needed to know was to find a true surviving member of that race. Mark could only sigh as the reasons for him to visit the spirit dimension started to pile up in front of him. Day 74, Mountain Base, Mount Malabito, General Nakar, Quezon. Another day had come. The day after Mark planted the spirit tree, at the center of the base. The night-evered tree that was one of the icons of the blood demon race. The uproar that happened yesterday had yet to die down. It was primarily because of the tree with blood-red leaves towering over their heads. The unusual-looking tree could be seen from anywhere inside or outside the base. Furthermore, the shade of the 7-meter-tall tree covered a rather wide area inside the mountain base. Still, the sight they all witnessed after the sunset was spectacular. As its name had said, the true beauty of the night-evered spirit tree would only show during the night and when it was dark. When the night fell, the whole base was enveloped with a reddish glow. It was because the leaves of the spirit tree exuded such light in the darkness. The light emitted by the leaves of the night-evered spirit tree was not painful to the eyes. It was more like a dim ambient light. The most amazing thing to see, however, was how red glowing wisps of light flew like fireflies around the spirit tree. As to how the story they knew had gone, spirit trees were not harmful unless its owner or the tree itself were felt threatened. As such, they exist to protect the race that raised them. And that was not everything. Each kind of spirit tree could provide benefits to anyone living around it, authorized by its master. The night-evered spirit tree could provide what the blood demon race needed the most in the borders of the spirit dimension. The borders could be said as one of the most unstable parts of the spirit dimension. Even with the ability of the blood demons to adapt to the environment effectively, there were times that they found it hard to adjust. This instability caused them to be weakened for a prolonged time than usual. Then, there came the night-evered spirit tree. These red glowing wisps would provide them the ability to resist the harsh conditions of the borders. And at usual times when the borders were stable, these red wisps provide vitality to everyone enveloped by it. Last night, everyone was able to sleep peacefully because of these red wisps. When morning came, they all woke up with the fullest energy they needed for the rest of the day. Mark, May, their daughters, Odalina, and her children, Ephelia, Amihan, Spera, Paphile, and Jaya with Theodore, were at the balcony for breakfast. Edsel should have been here too, if not for him requesting a separate place to live with Pearl. It was because of Pearl having trauma about her experiences in the new Infanta settlement. Being outcasted there, she found it hard to suddenly live along with many people. There was no reason to disagree with it. Mark understood her as he was also like that. If not for everyone here sticking around him, he would rather live in isolation. While having breakfast, they were discussing the next plans they needed to do in the base. Also, the idea to visit the spirit dimension in the future. Amihan was happy about that, and for some reason, Paphile felt a bit undecided about something. However, the chance to do that would not be too soon. The spirit tree might have grown big in an unexpected and rushed manner. However, not everything was ready. Even if the Night-Evered tree already exhibited some of its characteristics, it was still lacking its sentience. It was no different from lesser spirit tree that Amihan had used as her home. A magical tree without sentience. The sentience of a pure spirit tree was needed to open a portal and enter the space inside it. It was also required to open a gateway to the spirit world and back. Usually, a spirit tree would need some time to slowly grow. The length would vary depending on the person planting it. Along with that slow growth, its sentience would also develop. The spirit tree and the sentience would reach maturity at the same time. This would enable the tree to communicate with its master. As for the instances where the tree grew faster than it developed its sentience, it was a very rare occurrence. The circumstances of the Night-Evered tree that Mark planted was even more unique. At times like this, it was hard to determine how long it would take for its sentience to fully develop. They could only wait. And this was the crucial part they needed to prepare for. As a pure spirit tree existed in both dimensions, it was obvious that the tree had grown large inside the spirit dimension. It would be fine if the tree was planted in the spirit dimension because it would appear as a normal tree in the mortal world. However, it was the exact opposite this time. Because of this, it would surely attract the attention of the races that lived near where it grew. As spirit trees were precious existences, most threats would unlikely happen to the tree. However, a Night-Evered tree suddenly appearing in the spirit dimension would surely cause a huge uproar. And thus, Mark's group should be prepared to deal with any kind of situation that they might face upon entering the spirit dimension. They finally finished breakfast and everyone went their own ways. It was time for the children to study until noon. Odalina and Spera would handle the housework. Jaya, on the other hand, would only spend time inside her room with Theodore while doing anything she thought of doing. Mark and May, on the other hand, stayed on the balcony to work on things Mark had been working on since yesterday. Amihan and Ephelia were also here to help since, for some reason, Mark needed the presence of the two. Lastly, Paphile also remained at the balcony to watch. What Mark was designing was made him interested. Furthermore, he already exposed himself to the people here, there was no point to keep on hiding anymore. As for the things about him, everyone was sensitive enough to not ask. His name and his relation to Mark was enough for them to trust him. As for what relationship they had, Mark just told them that he was the father of someone he knew. That enough was shocking since Paphile looked nowhere like a father at all. At most, he looked like a student in the late college years. What kind of work was Mark doing right now that was enough to make someone from a spirit race interested? Mark was experimenting with how a stick, a slab of wood, and a block of wood, that came from a lesser spirit tree, could conduct magical energy. Together with the soil around the altar, that sealed the deity of bloodshed, Mark cut and uprooted the withering lesser spirit tree near it. Since that lesser spirit tree was already on the verge of dying, he might as well take it and experiment on it. Spirit trees absorb and exude magical energy. Maybe, the wood could conduct magical energy, right? As such, Mark proceeded with the experiments with this idea in mind. With the wood of a lesser spirit tree as the main conductor, blood metal as the frame, and the mental crystals as a power source, he wanted to create a weapon. If he succeeded in what he was trying to do, it would not be long for him to actually create a magical weapon. Something that Freed also tried to do in their world, however, the lack of efficient materials prevented it from developing far from the start. Back in Aerialis, they tried on the same idea with using the mental crystals to make weapons. After all, a single person could only have a limited number of psychic abilities even with the mental crystals. Thus, they tried to develop such weapons that could be used by anyone. Using the bones and body parts of psychic mutated animals and infected, they did succeed. However, the power of the psychic abilities used as a power source was toned down harshly. The reason being that the conductor had a very low capacity for transferring psychic energy. Thus, when the larger and more powerful psychic infected appeared, these weapons became useless. As Mark inherited Freed's memories, who was the brain of those weapon designs, he knew the greatest fault in those weapons. No material in their world could conduct psychic energy efficiently. On Earth, however, Mark might have found the possible solution to that problem. It was a very unfortunate thing for Freed and his world if Mark actually succeed. Both Earth's several other dimensions exist side by side. As Earth had grown along with its inhabitants, these dimensions also grew. However, Freed and his civilization were brought to another planet where everything was still at the start. There might be other dimensions that exist in that world. However, it was also different from what Earth had. Spirit trees and the like might have not exited on that planet. That gave them the limit for their survival. Now, Mark was trying to fill that error they suffered. What he only lacked now was mental crystals containing psychic abilities. Well, it would not last for too long though. After they opened the portal to both dimensions, Mark would not have a lack of resources anymore. When Mark voiced that idea, both Paphile and Amihan shivered. The two could only wish luck to those that would try to cross path with Mark. Using different sizes, thickness, and length of wood, Mark channeled his psychic energies to check the conduction. And as Mark had thought, this material he decided to call magic wood could conduct such paranormal energies as long as it was not miasma. Mark tried using miasma and it immediately destroyed the block of wood he was holding. Miasma was truly a destructive thing. As for other forms of paranormal energy he could feel it being channeled through the wood. However, it was hard to determine the flow and the energy seemed to be being dispersed while being channeled into the wood. Thus, Mark had an idea. He asked Odalina to bring Annika to his working area. Looking at the lively girl that arrived, Mark scratched his head. Annika was really good at forming a friendship with animals and insects. She arrived while being carried by Fine. It was even though it would not carry just anyone aside from Mark and May. Can you use the door next time? That was the first sentence that Mark said to her when she arrived. But it's faster like this. Annika complained. I'll use the actual workshop next time then. Mark said without taking his eyes away from his work. That statement made everyone feel tickled and made Annika pout. It was until she saw what Mark was doing. Her eyes then glowed and she exclaimed excitedly when she saw the glow in Mark's body traveling through the pieces of wood he was holding. With her interest taken in, the short banter stopped and she joined the work after Mark explained. Using Annika's eyes, they tried to determine the most efficient size and length that magic wood could channel energies. And, it really did not take too long. By the time that lunch was cooked and was served by Odalina and Spera, Mark and Annika managed to determine the best length and size of magic wood that could be used. Compared to how a psychics could channel their energy in their bodies, it was still lacking. However, if it was used properly, it might be able to be used as a good weapon. Not only Mark, Everyone that witnessed him using the stick of magic wood as a wand and firing a small electric ball with it like a wizard, everyone had good expectations about this. And as such, Mark put out the design for the first magic weapon he wanted to create. A barrier railgun that could be used along with Abigail's psychic barriers. Day 76 to 629 Mountain Area, General Nakar, Quezon. 3 days had passed since the incident about the blood-colored sky. The uproar had finally started to subside. Not only in the base but also in other places that were affected both directly and indirectly. Many animals that fled had returned to their nests. While not all did, some of those animals that were not feral could be seen attempting to approach the towering tree with blood-colored leaves. The reason was unknown. However, some of the more intelligent animals were trying to interact with the humans that lived around the tree. Of course, the number was very few as the animals' fear of humans and other predators were instinctual. The survivors that lived around the area that was affected by the event also started to calm down. They had been in high alert since the day of the blood-colored sky. As they knew nothing about the situation, they were thinking that it could spell danger. Although it was true because of the fleeing animals that day, trampling everything on their path to flee, nothing happened in the following days. Thus, they finally managed to return to their usual routine since the apocalypse started. Struggling to survive the threat of the infected and mutated animals while looking for food and water. In New Infanta settlement, the situation had settled down earlier than other places. It was after both Professor Suzuki and Major Bautista was informed by both Alana and Colleen after the discussion with Pafile happened. Of course, the two women did not tell anything that Mark told them not to spread. Still, just knowing that the whole event happened with Mark behind it, the higher-ups of the settlement did not know anything anymore. At first, they only saw Mark as a strange but powerful mutator in friendly terms with the military. Now, while the military still viewed him the same way, since they knew about his exploits in Bay City settlement, the government officials thought of otherwise. A powerful being like Mark that could possibly rule over a country with just sheer force could jeopardize their position. However, there was nothing they could do either but grumble in their corners while feeling helpless. That was why the military mocked these crocodiles behind their backs. Aside from implementing the rules, these government officials were barely any help within the settlement. For most, they were even harmful. It was as they tried to hire mutators and people, for their own protection and purposes, it weakened the settlement. While the uproar had calmed down for most places that had been affected by that event, there were some individuals that were in turmoil. Amihan was not the only paranormal being that lived within these mountains even before the outbreak. There were other spirits and elementals too. Some managed to retain their abilities to re-enter their homes despite being affected by mutagen and lived in isolation. There were also those that were in the same circumstances as the poor sylph and could only find alternatives to survive. Because of the event that transpired 3 days ago, some of them investigated in order to see the situation. Thus, they became troubled to see the actual situation. A pure spirit tree was actually born in the mortal world, and it was surrounded by a fortress made by humans. They could not fathom as to how such a thing happened. First and foremost, humans could not raise a pure spirit tree. They lacked both the capacity and energy to supply the birth of one. Furthermore, they could not think of the possibility of a king among spirit races to conspire with the humans of the current civilization. The rift between the relations of humans and spirit races were that deep. And thus, those individuals that saw the situation could not decide whether they should just flee, or if they should pay their respects to the master of the pure spirit tree. After all, if they were to go, there was the possibility of them being captured. Or worse, killed by the humans that lived there. The only strange thing was that they could detect 2 spirits and an elemental inside that fortress. And the most surprising part, they could faintly distinguish several individuals inside that were emitting an aura of the demon race. Unfortunately for them, these spirits and elementals were either individuals that came from isolated tribes or ones born in the mortal world. They could not recognize the significance of the night-evered tree. Thus, they continued to dwell on what to do. Aside from a small group of elementals and spirits. No, it was better to call them a large family than a group. Deep into the mountainous forest north of Darieton, a large mound could be seen covered under the roots of the large trees. Beside it, a small hut was built. It was too small that it was questionable whether it belonged to a human. In front of the two strange structures, a set of cut small trees and flat stones could be found arranged in a circular pattern. Due to the appearance of the flattened logs and rocks, it looked like a place for people to sit down and gather. Of course, humans would not fit onto these miniature chairs. And right now, the actual creatures using the place was gathered. At the highest log, a small male humanoid could be seen. The humanoid was about just 1 or 2 lines shorter than 8 inches in height. It looked taller though because of the pointed hat it was wearing. Wearing brown-colored clothes made of roots, bark, and other materials, along with his large pointy ears, he was, without a doubt, a creature called duende. Furthermore, he was not just a normal duende. He was the leader of a small tribe that lived inside this mound. Together with him, there were 7 more creatures around the place. Unexpectedly, only 2 of them were also duendes. One was a humanoid with a pair of clear-colored wings, a green flowery dress, and yellowish-green hair. This one was surely a sylph. Another looked like a 5-inch tall doll with golden hair. The appearance of this buka was definitely adorable. Her friendly and cute face would not be ignored that easily. The other was a way taller than everyone else here and was sitting on a large cut of wood. This Kibon was a little less than 2 feet tall and had golden teeth. The most noticeable thing about it was that its feet were facing backward with the heel in front and toes at the back. Every time it spoke, its voice sounded mellow and pleasing to the ears. One of them sat on the shoulder of the Kibon. A 4-inch tall humanoid wearing a glittering green dress and had 2 pairs of dragonfly wings on her back. This pixie scattered a bit of sparkling dust every time her wings moved. Lastly, a humanoid about 4 inches tall. It looked harmless with its innocent-looking face. Unlike the others, it was actually wearing clothes with intricate designs that had blue and white colors. The most noticeable about it was the large leaf it was holding like an umbrella. It was an unusual sight, especially since, aside from the leader of the tribe, everyone else here was all females. The strangest thing, however, were the last 2 female creatures. While the others could be said as creatures known to this country, these 2 were not. One was a pixie that had a Celtic origin. The other was actually a creature called Korapakuru. She was a creature known in Japanese culture. And the truth was even more overboard. Because all these females of different races were all wives of the tribe leader. It was a harem of folklore creatures. Furthermore, there did not seem to be any conflict between the wives as they worriedly discussed their next plans regarding the incident 3 days ago. Since they lived the nearest to the human fortress, they were in the greatest danger in case that the master of the spirit tree was hostile to them. However, they were not oblivious to the fact that the world had already changed. Being close to Darieton, they had seen humans turn into infected and mutated. They also encountered the mutated animals and insects of the forest. Furthermore, they already lost the ability to hide from human eyes. The worst thing, some of them already lost the ability to enter their home inside the mound. That was why the hut was built to house those poor tribe members that could not go home anymore. The most worrying part here, 3 of the leader's wives were affected by it and now stayed in that hut. The sylph, the pixie, and the Korapakuru. And thus, the 3 were very prone to danger. With the appearance of the spirit tree and its master in the area, they needed to decide what they had to do. Taramilio, the duende who was the leader of the tribe, decided on communicating with the master of the spirit tree. "We have no other choice," he said with a serious face. "Whether if the master of that spirit tree is an enemy or we run away, many of us will die. I can't bear to lose any of you, my wives." The girls were touched by his words. However, They could not let him face danger, just like that. Is there really no other choice? One of the two female duendes spoke with a sad expression. She was wearing a white dress and hat. Her name was Felonia. To Felonia's question, no one here could answer. Not only humans were facing a crisis. Even these races that lived in the mortal world. Right now, none of them knew what they should do. Unlike humans that could gather to survive, these races had more strict rules to follow, and most of them lived in isolation. It was already unusual that a number of different races gathered like this and actually formed a family. Thus, aside from keeping on hiding, their options to survive was more limited. I'm also worried about Amihan. Terramilio suddenly said, which made the 7 girls frown. However, it was not that they were angry at the tribe leader or at Amihan. They just hated the fact that Amihan would not appreciate Terramilio's feelings to her. After all, it could be said that Amihan was an odd one among sylphs as she actually lived side by side humans despite fearing them. In truth, they view Amihan as a friend and was also worried about her, especially Malaya, the sylph among the wives of Terramilio. After all, both of them belonged to the same race. Aside from their tribe, Amihan's tree was also closer to the human fortress. In fact, they wanted to check on her ever since this started. However, the journey through the mountains had become dangerous for them. While everyone lamented the fact that Terramilio had no choice but to confront the master of that spirit tree, the wives solidified their resolve. Husband, Dania, the Buka, spoke. Can we just go with you? I can't let any of you face danger. Terramilio immediately tried to shut Anaya down. However, not only her had that thought but all of his wives. We are the same. We can't just let husband face these dangers alone.
Angus, the Kibon angrily said. Her mellow-sounding voice did not make her words any feel angry, though. But Terramilio was in loss for words. All of his wives were staring at him with resolve. Still, he could not let any one of them face danger. As the man of the house, he should show his resolve. But then, the pixie said something that made him panic. If you don't let us come with you, we will leave you behind. Hearing that, the girls nodded. No, no, I. As if they already talked about it, the girls acted to stand up and leave. This made Terramilio even more anxious. They all looked serious and it was not the first time it happened. The last time they got angry at him, they all left and did not return until he looked for them. He could not have that happening right now. All right, you all can come with me, but make sure to always follow my instructions. Terramilio had no choice but cave in. Sometimes, his circumstances could make others envious. Still, while having wives that would always bicker was a total headache, having wives that had no conflict with each other could overwhelm the man in many ways.